Happy Friday, everyone. I'm Joe Morris. This is in case you missed it. Dustin Heisler's not with us this week, but we've got a great guest. I want to bring on Jeff Cook, the managing director with Shea Co. Jeff, thanks so much for taking time on this Friday to join us.
Yeah, happy Friday, Joe. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So you're a frequent contributor to Government Technology Magazine. Dustin and I, and many others frequently read your market roundups on the GovTech market. Why don't you start by telling our audience a little bit more about your background in GovTech and your role?
Yeah, happy to. So I'm a managing director and partner at Shea Company. And Shea Company, we're about a 50-person firm headquartered up here in Boston, which is what you see behind me. We have an office in San Francisco. And as a firm, we live a pretty narrow existence. We advise software businesses on mergers and acquisitions, as well as on capital raises. Most of what we do, about three-quarters of what we do, is mergers and acquisitions. About a quarter of what we do is capital raising. We're focused on the middle market, so think of it as 100 million in enterprise value at the low end. Largest deal we've done over the last 18 months has been about $3 billion. That's the firm in general. Myself personally, have covered public sector government technology for the better part of a decade. And so, that has become one of our more active practices here at the firm. We like to think we have one of the most active practices out there advising government technology businesses on mergers and acquisitions, on private capital raises. And we've advised on about 30 transactions over the last 5 years. We cover, sort of our purview of how we cover the world is, if it's funded by taxpayer dollars, that falls within our coverage of government or public sector. So that's public administration, it's public safety, it's education, it's transportation and infrastructure, and we've worked across all those sectors. And to name some, I guess to share some of the names of former clients, we work with some of the largest businesses, we work with some of the higher growth SaaS businesses. So on the public administration side, it's been business clients have included, Central Square, OpenGov, CoFile, GovOS, Granicus, Optimere. So a lot of the sort of household names in public administration. On the public safety side, it's been Lexipol, Envisage Technologies, Emergency Reporting, Collio, and then the list goes on. So it's been a market that we've really enjoyed covering. It's a very different market than it was, 10 years ago when we really started covering it. But it's been an awesome ecosystem to be a part of. So that's our background.
You mentioned a handful of deals that we've covered here on In Case You Missed It episodes over the last year or a couple of years, from Civic Plus to Optimere to Granicus to the most recent Rock Solid and Granicus deal.
Yeah.
Do you think that these deals that you found yourself in the center of are representative of the broader market activity that you're seeing in the GovTech market?
Yeah, I think so. Look, if you look at what's common across all those deals, one, they're strategic in nature, right? Two, the dynamic is a larger strategic, what we typically think of as a platform business, is buying, a smaller business to expand its addressable market, expand its product portfolio, expand its geographic reach. And that's been, the tried and true sort of way that this market has evolved over the last decade. There's been a lot of activity, a consistent amount of activity over time. But a lot of that activity has been, larger strategic businesses acquiring other, smaller businesses, as I just mentioned. And so every one of those businesses you named, Civic Plus acquiring Optimere, Civic Plus, sort of a big player in the citizen engagement space, acquiring Optimere to add compliance and archiving capabilities for digital communication. So sort of expanding that citizen engagement, reach. Same thing with Granicus and Rock Solid. And if you look at the activity over the last 18 months, a lot of it has fit that character of activity. The other thing that's common across all those is every one of those businesses is backed by private equity. I write frequently on my quarterly roundups about the influence and sort of the effect that private equity has had in this market. And you look at all those businesses and they've been backed by private equity that, likes to put more money to work by continuing to consolidate. So I look at those absolutely as sort of a bellwether of like the typical activity that we've seen over time in the space. What I would say is that, it's certainly not representative of the deal activity as a whole. While those are private equity backed larger businesses buying independent businesses, we're seeing a lot of fundraising. In Q3, I wrote, about a lot of different early stage, growth stage fundraisings that have happened. And then there's also the creation of the next Civic Plus, the next Granicus, the next Lexipol, where private equity investors, are looking for that founder-owned business to, be a consolidator in its own right, and start the next generation of these larger businesses that have been very active. So yeah.
You know, a couple of things. I want to pull the thread on that a little bit more. Are there certain types of companies, be that what stage they're in, solution type, that you see are having more activity right now in the GovTech market?
Yeah, I would say that the most activity we're seeing has been on the early stage side. And so when we say early stage, that's businesses that are less than 10 million of ARR. No doubt there has been sort of a more vibrant ecosystem than we have ever seen of founders, of second-time founders, of incubated companies that are scaling rapidly in sort of that early stage of the market. And so no question, there's, in terms of the number of transactions, that's where we're seeing the most activity. And it's not public admin, it's not citizen engagement, it's not public safety, it's across the board. If it's in government, I think we're seeing a lot of early stage company formation, and that's been awesome. I would say on the other side of it, there's been a lot of activity at the very large end of the market. So a lot of the names we just mentioned, these larger private equity backed businesses have gotten a lot larger, especially over the last 18 months. And so I think where we've seen a little bit of a dearth of activity, especially this year, has been sort of in the middle tier, right? So not the big, large consolidators, not the early stage, but the middle tier, where frankly, there's a little bit of a void in the market right now, where last year, a lot of those, $20 to $50 million ARR businesses were acquired by the larger businesses, those larger consolidators. And so, I think that's going to create an interesting dynamic for, the next few years, where this early stage, batch of companies that are less than 10 million of ARR are going to become like this big next generation of, these mid-sized companies. So we're very interested to see how that plays out over the coming years.
As you look at all those deals that you've had a thumbprint on, are there any learnings that you've taken from these deals in terms of something that the broader market should be aware of or take note of?
Yeah, look, every deal's a little bit different, right? And so I think the takeaways are, tend to be deal specific. I think that overall there's been very much a bias towards growth in the activity that's been happening. And I contrast that with 10 years ago, there was a lot of consolidation for the sake of consolidation, because I think on a spreadsheet, the ability to put two competitors together and take out a lot of costs, that made sense. In contrast, I think today we see a lot of the capital that's coming into this market is really having a bend towards growth. And that can be for, an existing business, expanding its reach, expanding its products, developing new features. For the early stage business, it's being able to, be that much more aggressive in terms of, hiring that incremental developers to get to market faster. And so at the highest level, I think that it is, it's good news because, it accelerates the pace of innovation in the market. I think as you go through the different, constituents in the ecosystem, it impacts everyone a little bit differently, right? For the government employee, there's probably going to be disruption if, there's a little bit of disruption if there's a strategic that buys, one of your software vendors. I think if you are an early stage company and you see, the bigger fish get that much bigger, that probably over time creates a lot more, white space opportunity for you to scale the business that you've been building. I think from an investor perspective, there's a considerable amount of running room, wherever you look, just given how fragmented and how much modernization needs to take place. So a little bit different depending on which part of the world you're looking at.
Throughout what you've talked about the role that capital's playing in accelerating in innovation. And I know, you mentioned a decade's worth of experience here. I know, looking at the early days of the GovTech 100 to where we find ourselves today, it seems like that pace has certainly picked up, and we're no longer trying to prove that there's a market here.
Yeah.
It seems like it's now it's very, very apparent that you can have an impact and have it be, fairly lucrative. What role are you seeing that capital play in accelerating the GovTech market as a whole?
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I would say that, it's both the availability of capital, as well as what that capital brings with it, namely expertise, operating expertise, experience in scaling software businesses. Because, you ask any investor out there, be it early stage or, late stage private equity, and everyone is going to differentiate, so the dollars they're bringing to the table by the expertise they're bringing to the table. And so, at the highest level, just the fact that capital is available, that there are investors, some dedicated to the GovTech market, some that are more general software technology investors that now want to invest in public sector. That was different than what it was 10 years ago. There's a reason why this market overall, has over indexes towards founder-owned businesses that funded themselves through their own revenue, through their own operations, and never really took outside capital. I think about that relative to other areas in software. There's just not a whole lot of venture or growth money, but there is today. And so, I think that we're going to see the pace of innovation increase that much more in the years ahead, because there is capital now where, you don't have to, if you want to take on that risk, if you want to find that investor to help you scale that much faster, that's available to you now in the way that it wasn't years ago. And going back to what I said, in the prior question, where a lot of the capital coming in has been towards growth, right? And growth fundamentally is tied to how do we do what we're planning to do, but do it that much faster? How do we hire that incremental salesperson? How do we hire that incremental developer? How do we make that really strategic acquisition that is going to, accelerate, our product vision? So I think overall capital is, very instrumental in sort of accelerating the pace of innovation in the market, and we've certainly seen that over the last few years, but that's only going to continue to increase.
In case you missed, this audience is equal parts industry to government, and you look at government technologies readership. If you put yourselves at the front lines as a CIO or IT manager, an IT leader, what do you make of all this activity, whether it's mergers, acquisitions? Earlier, you talked about maybe some of that concern that could bubble up. But if you put yourself in the shoes of a public servant, what do you make of the market activity?
Yeah. It's probably confusing, I think, to see all these, headlines, and then what that means over the long term. I think the good news is that, if you rewind 10, 15 years ago, there were a lot of, there was a lot of consolidation that happened in the market that, that I don't think quite got it right? Maybe they said, hey, we have 2 duplicate customer success departments. We can get rid of 1, right? But that customer success person's instrumental to maintaining those relationships, for whomever their end customer were, in some cases, 20 years. I fast forward to today, and I think people have learned from some of the, the challenges in the past, especially for these very acquisitive businesses, and they realize that I think overall that, the value of any GovTech business is, its customers and the people that are serving those customers, right? And so I think a lot of the, the investors that have done well in this space, that frankly can see the value of businesses, put that on a pedestal first and foremost, that the one thing we need to protect is our relationships with customers and the people serving that. And so I think that is good news, where in years past, that was not the case. But look, you will see some disruption, right? If you're on the, if you're a consumer of the software within government, anytime 2 strategic businesses, come together, there's going to be some change. And so overall, I don't look at that as a net negative. Again, I think a lot of the capital coming into this market is to, of the mindset of how do we serve our existing customers better? How do we, give them products that, can interoperate better? And so, I think overall it's a net positive, but certainly not without some of the day-to-day challenges, that are involved in any M&A.
Yeah, you look at our surveys, you look at the past episodes, there's a number of big trends obviously impacting the market at any time. I mean, cybersecurity is a constant. Workforce now has rapidly moved up the priority list. Cloud, low code, no code, you name it. What's your perspective on some of the big macro trends right now that you're seeing across government technology?
Yeah. Yeah, look, I would say at the highest level, it's continued adoption of cloud. I don't think we can have a conversation anywhere across the market where that thematically isn't, at the top of folks' list. And then you unpack that a little bit, and I think it's the fact that it's easier to consume and deploy cloud software. Of course, security is a huge piece of that. And so as we look at the macro trends, especially coming out of the pandemic, I think it's just an acceleration of what we'd seen in years prior, which is modernize a lot of the existing technology. And frankly, there's still a lot of pen and paper. There's a lot of manual processes out there. A lot of our clients aren't going out there and displacing existing software that's been installed. They're displacing a binder, right, or a pen and paper or something manual. And so I think that the next handful of years are still going to be sort of the basics of just getting modern software in place. Above and beyond that, as we think a little bit longer term, a lot of the technologies that have shaped private sector and are currently shaping private sector inevitably are going to be adopted by government. The wealth of data that exists in government and the decision making in government, how to use that data to inform better decisions, like that is going to be a massive category across all different segments of government. You mentioned low code, no code. There's still a lot of very manual, highly custom software out there, and you look at what's happened in private sector. A lot of that shifted towards low code, no code, and so I think that is going to inevitably be an influential technology trend in government. And then you go to things like state and govtech, right? And you meet a lot of the very early stage companies, and you can kind of see what the next 10 years are going to look like in the market. And frankly, it looks a lot like the trends that have defined the private sector.
I won't ask you the 10-year outlook, but I will ask you. You think the market will kind of be consistent over the next 12 to 24 months, or are you expecting any big shifts over that time frame?
Yeah. So I would to put it in perspective, I look at sort of what's happened the last 2 years and what do we expect for the next few years. So 2021 was absolutely by every measure a record year by number of transactions, by size of transactions. I mean, the market has completely changed from 2021, and so that will, in my mind, set the high bar for some time. Up until 21, we saw a steady, consistent run up of deal activity, number of transactions, diversity of investors in the space, and then we had the spike that was 21. This year I think will settle as the second busiest year on record, followed only by 21. So down year over year, but still a tremendously active year by any way you want to cut it. And as I looked at 23, I think 23 is going to be pretty flat over this year. The first half of 22 was pretty busy, continuation of what we saw in 21. But because of what's going on sort of in the broader macroeconomic environment, I think a lot of companies that may have elected to raise capital or decide to go pursue an exit, I think people have a mindset of let's wait till it feels a little bit more stable out there. If we don't have to do something, why take on the risk of the capital markets right now? And we see it continuing into maybe the first quarter of next year until we start to see some pickup. So look, I think Q4 is going to be a little bit slow. I think Q1 might be a little bit slow as well. But I think as we look at 23 as a whole, it's going to be similar to volume to 22. I think once we get into 24, I think we'll start to see that consistent, that return to growth year over year in terms of dollars and number of transactions and all the stuff we look at to measure sort of the health of and momentum of the GovTech market.
Yeah, for that industry investor community, are you seeing any unmet needs out there today in the market that might be white space for the right industry partner?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's a lot of unmet needs, and really, it's where does pen and paper still exist? Where does that homegrown, that homegrown system that is a green screen? Where does that exist? And I think the answer to that is kind of everywhere, right? And so there's from an opportunity perspective, I think anywhere you look, there is going to be some process, some problem in need of modernization. I think from a business model perspective, I really like Dustin's article that he wrote last year just about the App Store moment, because it used to be that you could build a product that's that can solve a built for there's a lot of built for purpose companies solving very specific problems. The challenge was, how do you reach your customer? How do you have that distribution to actually build a business around it? And I think a lot of that has changed, right? Where with SaaS, in cloud businesses, it's software that's easier to consume, it's easier to sell. The whole inside lightweight sales model is something that we've seen really pick up steam in the market. And so I think that business model is going to be one that continues to be very influential over time relative to a lot of the sort of incumbents in GovTech that have a bunch of people flying around and really long sales cycles, traditional enterprise sales. So yeah.
You're right. It's a target-rich environment, right? That's what's so great. Any advice for someone that's listening in today that's thinking about entering the market, thinking that this may be a marketplace for them?
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think we see limitless opportunity here in the market. For as much activity as we've talked about here, and as much as activity as I write about every quarter, we're only getting started. And I do think that coming out of the pandemic, the industry is just on a different trajectory. I don't look at what's happened over the last 2 years as a temporary bump. I think it's a step change sort of function in the trajectory of the market overall. So it continues to be a growth market, and I think that's a great place to start a business. Going back to one of the things I said earlier, is for advice for people that are starting out, is that there's a lot of resources for early stage founders in the way that there were 10 years ago at this point. There's accelerators, there's incubators, there's capital, there's operators that have gone through an exit or two, that are now spending their time advising early stage companies. There's more conferences, there's more ways that the ecosystem sort of gets together, so there can be that knowledge exchange of everything that people have learned. And so I think that the GovTech industry overall has just reached a state of maturity in terms of company formation that mirrors private sector, right? Where there are those resources that can help founders navigate the difficult first few years of building a product and building a company around it and going from there. So, I mean, I think a lot of those resources are good at finding the interesting ideas and founders and companies. But to the extent that early stage founders aren't finding it, I don't think you have to look all that hard to see that stuff, and it makes a difference.
So Jeff, outside of finding your quarterly roundups on govtech.com, what's the best way to keep up with you?
Yeah, so the link that just popped up at the bottom of the screen, that's my LinkedIn. Our corporate website is a great place to find us, and I think my email is published in the quarterly roundups as well. So any of those ways are a great way to reach me.
Well, we'll make sure to drop the corresponding links in the show notes. And Jeff, we appreciate you taking time to join us on in case you missed it, and obviously greatly appreciate your insights on the GovTech market.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me, and look forward to the next time.
All right, happy Friday.